Okay, we left off with training. Two things to note about training. There's two types of employees. One, authorized employees. Simplest way to look at it is anybody who has to apply a lock has to be authorized. And if you're working on equipment and you're in harm's way, you have to be under lock protection. Does anybody have industries that question that right now? Like you have people working on it without locks? Go ahead.
You got an engineer coming down to look at the process or the experiment, and he's got his hands in the way, but they say engineers aren't authorized employees.
Right.
And I go,
Sounds like you have a gap.
yes.
For sure. And if there's an accident, they're going to say your company's liable for not training him because you're requiring him to put his body in harm's way, but you're not allowing training to authorize him to apply locks.
Right.
And if you allow him to apply locks without training, you're liable. So the best method is train everybody who's applying locks. It could be cleaning staff, contractors. You could have specialized training just for contractors who are there for 30 minutes, one time for the whole life. You could walk through 5-minute training real quick. OSHA doesn't say a training has to be 4 hours long. It should be for your people who are there 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, day in, day out, week after week. It should be a longer training. But for somebody who's coming in for one task, their training can be, you're working on this filler, there's CO2, there's electrical, 480 volt, there's pneumatic, and there's kinetic energy. All this has been dissipated, been locked out. You have a right to inspect it, and then apply your lock on the group lock box, and you can do your work. That's your training. It took less than 30 seconds. They've been trained, now they can apply the lock, and they're under lock protection if they apply one lock to that group lock box that has the keys for all 5 locks that went on the filler.
A production employee who only uses alternative measures for routine, repetitive, and integral, are they authorized or effective?
This is getting into what to, when to, and the intent. The golden rule is, and this is something you might want to write down because we have to keep coming back to it, if you're ever going to place your body in harm's way, where unexpected re-energization of that equipment would cause injury, then you have to lock it out. So even minor routine or repetitive process, I know there's that terminology in the regulation, that does not allow a wild card for not locking it out if that golden rule is broken. And I'll say it again. If unexpected re-energization of that equipment could cause harm to you, you have to lock it out. So if this is the moving plane of parts on the equipment, and I'm doing my work out here, I don't have to lock it out. I'm an operator, I'm cleaning a panel, wiping off the screen, no lockout's necessary. But there's an arm that's constantly moving here, and it's up, and it's stopped, and it's off, but it's not locked out. Maybe I keyed it off and opened the guard. As soon as I place my hand within this moving plane of those parts, alternate means don't protect me now. That guard, that key off switch, everything is not lockout-tagout, it's not equivalent, and it's not OSHA approved. So you need to use an equivalent level of protection to protect that employee from minor, routine, and repetitive. So there is some definite gray areas in that problem, right?
Well, the key word is equivalent. I mean, as long as your alternative measures can show that they are equivalent to full lockout tag.
And so what I recommend as equivalent is like a triple redundancy system where every one of those factors would save them, and it would have to be all 3 failed, all 3 re-engineered, all 3 safety switches, all 3 key off switches would all have to fail in order for him to be hurt or injured in that process. And it's also risk benefit. So if he gets hurt and you have those 3 engineered steps to protect him or her, you're still liable because OSHA will come in with 2020 and say, should have locked it out. And you're like, but it's an injection molding press and they have to get in there to clear the parts 23 times a day. And you're like, so re-engineer the machine. If you're getting in there and they got hurt, that's why you didn't lock it out. Or you didn't have equivalent level of protection, because obviously they get hurt. So it's up to you. Once you go outside that gray area and you say, I'm not going to lock it out and I'm going to allow them to cross that plane, you better be really sure you have a good engineering program to design that machine to not start back up. And if there's employee complaint, if OSHA's on site while you're doing it, there's an argument that says, why are you inside that machine? Why aren't you locking it out? And then you could be cited for that. That's less likely, but also a case to consider. So recommendations from ESC, lock it out if you ever place your body within that moving part. And one way to avoid placing your body in there is if you're reaching in to clear a part, you don't need to use your $75,000 arm to reach in there. Use a piece of dowel to reach in there. That way when that press activates and crushes the dowel. You're like, whoops, 75 cents, I'll get another one. Get in there and do it again. That's the key, is trying to find alternatives to keep your body out of harm's way, not finding alternatives to allow your body in and hoping that the kiosk switches and guards and everything else hold. That's what OSHA is in a constant fight with manufacturers and guarding manufacturers and machine manufacturers on, is because they want to engineer safety, but safety can't be engineered, it can only be locked down. That's the only way to ensure it. You can engineer safety all you want, but then when engineering fails, and you're in that machine, and the amount of cycles was exceeded, when people get hurt, it was an avoidable accident. Because lockout would protect them every time.
How much documentation do you need that you gave me that training, that 30 seconds on what I've got to do?
That's up to you.
No, it's up to him.
It's up to you.
Yeah.
No, it's up to you and how long it needs to be.
It's a performance standard where if they don't perform,
Yeah.
is it adequate? And you have to do that auditing to verify that they're doing it.
How does, Jimmy gave me that training, and I stick my finger in there and it gets cut off. You come in and say, how come you stuck your finger in there? I said, I didn't know any different. Jimmy says, well, I trained him on it. And I say, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I have a contractor trainer program that I walked you through, and I said, this is a filler that has kinetic energy potential, CO2, electrical, 480 volt, pneumatic, and we've already locked them all out. I trained in all these sources and what the hazards are. I've also told you about that sharp blade that can come down, so you don't push your hand in here, and then you did that anyway. So it was in my training, it was documented for that machine, and then you did it.
But no, there's my point. What's the documentation? Do
Just
I have
your
to
training
do I have to
program.
sign it? Do
I would,
Yeah,
yeah.
signature, yeah.
Yeah, you have to have proof. If there's no
That's
proof,
my
it never
point.
happened. Yeah.
Well, you gave it the rest of the class, but I was in the bathroom when you did it, so I didn't hear it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, trust me, I know
We've had
about
that one
excuses.
play out.
I hear all
If
the
it's not
time.
documented, it never happens. When we give trainings to our clients and authorized employees, we have them not just sign a log, but take a comprehension test that tests their knowledge. It's not just this easy, low ball, easy answer, true, false, lockout's important. It's more like, true or false, you should lock it out during shutdown maintenance. And they're like, wait, what? What does that even mean? You know, it gets them thinking. And so they have to pass that with a certain level of accuracy in order to be authorized. If they don't pass it, they have to retake it. And so once they signed the log, they took the test, and here's the test record, you have proof. You have proof that you trained them, they comprehended it, and if they have all the tools to do their job and they still chose not to, there could be an accident with no OSHA citation.
And I've done fatalities where there was no OSHA citation because of documentation.
Yeah.
However, most people hate documenting, and they don't document the enforcement. How many people in here document a verbal warning? We just had this discussion. How many don't? That's the other issue. If you don't document a verbal,
Never happened.
it didn't happen. And that's one of the problems we have. I know people that have companies where their introductory meeting is their first verbal warning. So your orientation, this is your first verbal. The next one's written. So that's where, and it's progressive discipline.
I think to his question though, when
have
OSHA comes in, let's say you've got a written test, and we do,
Mhm.
we actually have in our program, if you score less than this, you must immediately contact your supervisor for clarification on any questions that you missed. And so OSHA comes in, and although we're not required to have a test, all we're required to do is show proof of training.
Mm-hmm.
We've decided to go above and beyond, and now we've got this employee who did not follow up because they got a 60 instead of a 70%, and OSHA comes around and says, well, you're not managing your own procedures effectively. So you always set yourself up, but yet that shouldn't prevent you from going a little bit farther.
Yet it's very difficult for OSHA to cite based on when you're going over and above and cite you under your procedures, because we can't cite under your procedures. OSHA can only cite under the standards that are in there. So if you go over and above and you make a glitch, you know, it's a very difficult area to cite.
See, I've always been told that they could, 5A1 you if you were not following your own procedures, even if they were.
Not if there's a specific standard.
They can try.
They can.
I mean,
OSHA
is human, so they make a lot of mistakes too.
That's open to interpretation sometimes.
Yes.
I mean, it's not this
And not here to beat up
format
on
that they're always going to be consistent. There's a lot of inconsistencies. Where one OSHA citation officer will come on site, he'll cite you for everything. Another one will come on site and say, you got a clean bill of health, you're good. You can't rely on their judgment for your internal quality.
I've hired lemons. When I was a supervisor, I've hired people that were not the best because they were on the list, one person on the list, and you're told to hire them. So then hire them. And then you spend the next 10 years trying to get rid of them.
Oh, you got that problem too.
Well, he works for the government, so he's probably worse than we are.
Oh, you don't even want to go there. You don't want to go there. I've got horror stories of documenting 500, 600 hours in a given year and not being able to get rid of them. So it's not fun. But the key on this is that you enforce it and document that enforcement where you audit. If you don't audit and document, it's worthless. And you have to enforce it and document it. So if somebody makes a mistake and they end up getting their finger lopped off because they made that error, if the only time you write people up is when they have an injury, you don't have an enforcement program. You should be documenting those near misses because we got that 100 triangle where near misses are at the bottom. If we don't document those near misses and change those, we're not going to change the top of that pyramid. So we got to look at the near misses and areas of concern. OSHA, unfortunately, only looks at, in terms of the numbers, injuries, illnesses, and fatalities. That's the numbers that OSHA looks at. The companies should be looking at the near misses, the areas of concern that are brought up to people, to really reduce the base on that triangle. Because when you have people do that, you do change that triangle. Mm-hmm. And it's been pretty consistent over the years on the numbers. So just the companies that I see that really do it well, look at the base of the triangle for the near misses, the areas of concern, the potentials for loss. You reduce the base on that triangle, and that's what you try to do.
Yeah. Gets everybody's mind aware too, and it reduces complacency, which we all agree is like probably #1 biggest hazard. And so when you get them to just document near misses, you're eroding the complacency. It's going to kill them. So you get them to open their eyes up more often. You have the team meetings weekly or monthly, bringing those up then. Very important.
And also communicating in a non-personal way the deficiencies that were found to other people. So, there's a lockout that wasn't done on this machine. Don't identify the machine, don't identify the person, but identify what the procedure was that was missed to keep that churn. Just like a stockbroker, you want to keep churning people to think about safety, because when they think about it, they're more likely to do it.
The other the other employee that's out there is the ones not applying the locks. They still need to be trained though on lockout-tagout. Why?
We'll be in the area.
It could be an affected employee.
They'll be an affected employee for sure. Why do affected employees need training on lockout if they're never going to use lockout? You have an office manager in your building. She's never going to go out to the manufacturing floor. You know that. She just never has, probably never will. Now she's an affected employee. She's in the general area. She's in that manufacturing building. Why does she need to be trained on lockout-tagout? Other than because OSHA said so. What's the real reasoning?
So she knows why it's there, what it means when she sees it.
Exactly. So she knows what it's there for. What's going to happen when that one day she's there alone, she hears an alarm going off in the back. She's like, oh, I'm the only one here. And she goes back there and she sees some red lock that looks pretty flimsy that's preventing her from getting something running that would shut the alarm off. She's going to say, I got something to take that lock off, a screwdriver. They actually will come off with screwdrivers. People have shown me that. They're not security devices, they're deterrents. And then she gets it running because she didn't know what lockout-tagout was. That's why. They need to know not to touch it. That's pretty much the general message to affected employees. And it's important to give them training before a lock or lockout's ever administered, so people aren't doing the training on the back end. It's training, procedures, devices, and then implementation. So many times they get to the training a year later, or, they hire somebody and through the process, 5 months goes by and they've been locking out and taking out equipment. That's a big gap that needs to be closed. Training should be part of their hiring process and administered before they're using it. Procedures, we talked about what needs procedure. We'll get into that detail. Procedures should be created for all equipment with 2 or more energy sources. That's the number one question that's going to give you the filter to get you the most amount of equipment that needs it. There's actually 7 more criteria that the equipment that didn't meet that criteria must meet in order to be exempt from requiring a procedure. So all that complicated, convoluted logic I just used, think of it this way. Every piece of machinery needs a procedure, then you're much easier, you're much better off. The things you thought didn't need a procedure probably do. And the real obvious ones, like a computer or a desk fan, probably don't need a procedure because it's pretty obvious. It's not going to hurt you, and you know how to lock it out. So if a piece of machinery is a cord and plug style, like a drill, is a machine-specific procedure required still? How many people have heard the cord and plug loophole? I'll call it because so many people think it's a loophole. Yeah, you've heard it?
Yeah.
And you have drill presses that are as tall as I am that plug in.
No, all ours are hardwired into the.
Oh, hardwired. Yeah, so those ones are more obvious. Who has cord and plug equipment? Yeah. And do you have procedures for those? He's not a real OSHA officer.
I retired, so
Yeah.
I don't do enforcement.
Trying to think if we've got for each individual drill press. I don't believe we do.
Most people don't because they think cord and plug doesn't need it. But it's just as dangerous as the ones that are hardwired in because it has residual energy. And cord and plug isn't always obvious either. Just because you can trace the cord, what if it's a 50-foot long cord that's intertangled with other cords? So there's 7 other criteria it must meet. Also, if there's ever an accident on that drill press due to uncontrolled energy, it doesn't matter if it's cord and plug. It still needs a procedure. So we'll get into the 8 criteria, what those are, but it's just, I'm only asking this and digging in is because that's a common pitfall. People think cord and plug's exempt, that's just not true. There's 8 criteria it must meet to be exempt.
Well,
And those 8 criteria are really hard to meet.
when bringing that up, that's one of the problems with the OSHA situation. It's kind of like reading the Bible. When you look through that 1910.147 says this. If I dig a little farther, I can find something that says just the opposite. That cord, plug-in cord is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? If I'm going to get fined no matter what I do, is what most people think.
That's what most people think. It is confusing. I agree. That's why we exist. I mean, it's our core focus of an engineering firm, and we're growing at 150% a year. It's a very confusing regulation. Absolutely. It's the reason it's the #1 most cited in manufacturing, not because they're reluctant to comply. It's difficult, and OSHA wrote it in such a broad term for a reason. There's industries that cover maritime to construction to agriculture to manufacturing to office environments. And if you write one regulation to cover all those, it has to be broad to fit all of them. And so they give so much leeway that so they allow each safety manager, each building manager, site manager to tailor their program to their needs. The problem is people think, I've complied with these minimum requirements and I did no tailoring, then it doesn't fit their needs. Because OSHA's regulation is not an instruction manual. It's a guideline. Like you said, it's kind of like the Bible. It's a guideline. Here to here, anywhere in between.
I think the term is performance standard because you have to perform to the standard.
Yeah.
And it's so broad. When we wrote specific things like for the hazard communication standard where we had one data sheet that everybody had and they all had to fit all their stuff in that one data sheet for transfer. We got yelled at for being too specific. Then we created a hazard communication program that's so broad. Now you have data sheets for one chemical that'll be 15 pages and that same chemical from another manufacturer will be 2 pages. There's no standardization between those two. And OSHA would get yelled at for that because we're too broad. You don't have a one-size-fits-all because the industry varies. I've inspected everything from horse slaughters to the sewers of Milwaukee to ships to airplane repair. I could say I inspected car manufacturer, but that was AMC, so that's different. Yeah, they had gremlins in their plant. But the industry is so broad that it has to be done. And it's the people that are more acquainted with the industry that should be setting up their audits and their procedures to make it effective, because it has to be effective.
So that was procedures. We'll get into more of what equipment needs it, but auditing is the third component. Somebody had mentioned grouping procedures together or having similar pieces, and they created one for each one. OSHA interpretation letters say that you can't create undue burden because you went above and beyond, just like what Pat said. There is specific language in the regulation that says all procedures must be audited. Now, while you can group audits, I don't recommend it because it's more complex to manage that effectively and make sure you documented changes real time, so that if you changed that ball valve to a butterfly valve and it wasn't included in your annual respective sampling audit, that's going to get missed for 2 or 3 years. That's kind of a gap you don't want left open that long, because that discrepancy could lead to an accident. We recommend all procedures and finding a way to make it more efficient so that you're not penalized too heavily by creating extra procedures.
What about, you're talking about auditing for the procedures, what about auditing for the training?
The employees are the other aspect. So the procedures are one, all procedures, and the authorized employees have to be audited. That's where they allow a respective sampling, and a respective sampling can be okay if it's impractical to do every employee every year for auditing. One way to simplify your auditing is employee refresher training every year. You can give them your audit and refresher training all in one class, all employees. If you have one roof, 10 authorized employees, and they're all in one place, that's a pretty simple solution to do your audit that way. If you have 1,000 employees spread out through 23 locations nationwide, and there's outside service reps, that's really difficult to get all those people together for one refresher training a year. So you would use respective sampling for that scenario to give you the equivalent level of safety. You'd also use a lot of online tools to give them the training. So respective sampling is if you have a group of 1,000 and you audit 300, that better be 300 of 300 comprehension. If you find 290 of 300 comprehended the program and 10 didn't, that doesn't just mean retrain 10. That means you have to extrapolate that out by 3 times to get your overall group, and now you have another 20 anticipated people who don't understand your program, and you need to retrain your entire group because of that deficiency that was found in the respective sampling. Sounds complicated, so we recommend every employee every year, unless it's really impractical to do
That's
so.
just a refresher, right?
Refresher and audit, hands-on.
The audit, same thing. Once
Yeah, with the refresher, give them a hands-on. You can do it as a group, OSHA will allow for that, and then make it really practical. Some people make really undue burden for them during this, where they train every employee and audit every employee on every machine every year. And I've seen that before, and I'm thinking, your program costs way too much to maintain. You can simplify this down and get much more efficiency because they've created a hatred for lockout from the employees to the management, because there's a huge amount of burden from their program now. That's what I call misinterpretation of the regulation. And when we come in, we can save them a lot of money by saying, this isn't gaining you any level of safety for all the investment you're making. You can cut your investment down to here and have even higher level of safety because you can get better buy-in to your program if it's more efficient. Equipment, this is the obvious things. Here we're showing some ABUS-style recycled locks, so you don't even have to have locks that are not environmental friendly now. You can actually have recycled locks, non-conductive shackles, or conductive chromoly shackles. Lockout stations, like Pat had mentioned, putting those nearby the equipment. That way it encourages them to use it. If they have to go to a safety terminal that's a mile away or half a mile away, you think they're going to go get a lock? Probably not. They'll probably just use a tag if they're lucky, or they'll just shut it off and somebody turns it back on. Put a rag on it, maybe. I've seen it all. Duct tape with a note on it. Don't turn this on. So putting these stations nearby helps encourage people to use them. They do cost a little more when you're investing in your program, because now you're putting these locks out there that can get legs and walk away, and you're giving the authorized employees their personal locks. However, these encourage usage of the program, and considering the investment, this might be $500. An accident costs $100,000. A citation can cost $1 million. Lawyers can cost several million. Now all of a sudden $500 doesn't look like that much money.
One caveat on the locks. A lockout lock is to be used exclusively for lockout.
Yes.
Not for locking out a machine for long term when it's out of service. That's going to have to be a different lock.
How much is it a citation per occurrence for that?
Oh, heck, it's running pretty steep right now.
$7,000.
Several thousand bucks.
Yeah,
So
per incident.
your,
for every toolbox I see that on, it's 5,000, 7,000 bucks.
You come in on an inspection, and for some reason I'm an idiot, and I decide to walk you through one of my locker rooms because that's the quickest route, and it keeps you off the production floor, and you happen to see 2 or 3 of our designated lockout locks on people's lockers.
it's a violation.
It's a violation per instance.
For instance.
Have you ever disciplined anybody, you know, in order to avoid a
Yes.
citation on that,
Yes.
you would have to have documentation of discipline and that it's not a permitted practice. If the only time you document it is when the OSHA guy shows up and then you write the guys up,
Right.
you're dumb as a brick.
So you go through the locker room, and you actually find 5 locks. What is the minimum, 7,000?
Yeah.
It's gonna be, it depends on
The lower
size,
end, if
it
you didn't
depends
know about
on good faith, it depends on history. It could be even higher if it's a repeat.
Or you could say, I found 5 locks, that seems willful, you guys are not enforcing your policy.
Yeah.
So it triples it.
It could get to 70K.
Yeah, easily.
But the reality is that you've got to document it when people do that. So when people do it, you discipline them, you document it,
Mhm.
and then you make sure it doesn't happen again. And if it does happen again, you use your disciplinary policy to go upstream from, say, a verbal to a written to a termination, suspension, whatever you've negotiated.
Somebody had asked during break how OSHA calculates their fines, or how they determine, I think you asked, how they determine how much a fine is going to be for a company. If they came into a company like ours, we're so small, they're not going to hit us with a $2 million fine. To send a message to us, it would only take a few $1,000s. But if we're BP and we have 50,000 employees and we just caused an accident and somebody got killed, you think they're going to give them a $5,000 fine? No. They get an $80 million fine. So they adjust the fine to how big the business is because they're trying to send a message. It should feel the pain. And if the business is a multi-billion-dollar, super profitable business, they get bigger fines because they can afford more, and it's going to take more for them to get the message. $5,000 is like a speeding ticket, not even. It's not even on their radar. So,
Also, the bigger you are, the bigger your history is too.
sure, for willful.
And there will be more documentation available because everybody's history is available online these days.
The last component, corporate policy, again, it's not required, specifically stated that you need a corporate policy, but there's so many elements required for compliancy. You really need a corporate policy to be compliant. You must specifically detail the means of enforcement, describe protocol to correct deviations, talking about proactive enforcement within your program, a decision flow chart on how to handle that. Overall, it should just act as a brains for your whole program and be a useful guide for employees. So often I've seen corporate policies written by lawyers. I think that's a good guide for employees. It's a good liability, peace of mind for upper management after they got that first citation. They're like, get these hugely expensive lawyers in here, make sure this is locked solid, and then nobody can understand it. That doesn't serve any purpose. You can have that, but you need another one written in plain speak so people can understand it. Now, I think people have been asking for this, which equipment needs lockout-tagout. These are the 8 criteria. We'll just glaze over these because they're really boring. No potential for stored energy. 1 energy disconnect. I boldface the important key terms here because otherwise it seems very cyclical. So no potential, easily isolated, 1 disconnect, be able to be locked out during service or maintenance. So like a radar tower for aircraft control, not really practical for lockout. Be able to be locked out using 1 device, have device under exclusive control, be able to be serviced without creating hazards for other employees, have no prior accidents. That's the wild card on the end there. It could have met all 7, but if it had a prior accident, now it needs a procedure. Now this isn't when to, this is just whether or not it needs a procedure, so remember that. When to was the golden rule. If you ever place your body in harm's way, unexpected reinterposition, cause harm to you, that's when to. This is the 8 criteria for what needs it. So now that we're equipped with the knowledge, does this industrial washing machine need a procedure?
Yes.
Yes. These are good. Sometimes I get a lot of no's. Anybody say no? It does. And how many sources do you think it has? It has electrical because we see an e-stop button here.
It's got water.
It's got water because it's a washing machine. We don't have to ask any more questions because one energy disconnect, which should be easily isolated. One disconnect. It says it twice. If it doesn't meet one of these, it needs a procedure. So you can quit asking all the questions. As soon as you know it has 2 energy sources, you move it on. What about a welder? Oh wait, it's just cord and plug though, right? You don't need it? You hear it all the time. Now we're learning that this needs a procedure, but I'm thinking there's a lot of people in the room thinking, we don't have procedures for our welders. I'm going down a list of commonly overlooked equipment for a reason. I'm not showing you an injection molding press or a filler. Duh. Everybody knows that needs a procedure. I'm showing you equipment that's commonly overlooked. $70,000 fine. If somebody gets injured on that, you knew it needed a procedure and you didn't have one.
So if, not using this as an excuse, but if your machine that you're trying to lock up only has one energy source, and that's it, do you need a procedure for that?
You
Yeah.
can. There are equipment out there that meet all 8 criteria. I'd say, what percentage of the equipment is that, Matt? Say,
Small cord
between
and
1
plug.
and 2%?
Yeah. Oh, if that.
Yeah. It's really hard to find equipment that doesn't knock off one of those criteria. Like a hand drill where the kinetic energy automatically dissipates, so it's not a factor, and it's just a short cord, it's not hardwired in or a super long cord intertangled. That could be exempt. We'll get to that one. But that's rare. Those equipment is rare. So before we move on, we all agree it needs a procedure. It has electrical. What else?
Yes.
Gas. It counts. Something else is it residual? Heat. So we've got thermal. So we've got 3 sources, and that's all we need to know is it has 2, and we can create a procedure for it. So if you're walking through your facility, you make it a list. You don't have to make the procedure right there. You're just making a list of inventory of what needs a procedure.
Okay, let's go back to that one real quick. Should be pretty simple.
Yeah.
How do I lock it out? I can put a lock on the end of the plug, undo that.
You
I
can put a cap on that.
The ball valve cover on that and lock it out, would that be sufficient?
And then wait for the residual energy.
Wait for the
to
heat to
dissipate.
go down.
And you can put a fan on it if you need to service it quickly and time is of the essence. So you can speed up the dissipation of thermal. Or you could wear PPE to protect you from the thermal energy, to speed up. So you can work on the hot if the PPE protects you. So there's ways to get efficiency there. I'm not saying you can't work on it while it has energy. You just have to protect the employee from it,
And look to see if there's a spring in that wire feed mechanism that brings it back.
depending on what you're doing, yeah. And if that spring is enough to be hazardous, if it's just a small spring, not enough to amputate, it's not a big deal. What about this machine? I should hear some groans now because there's probably some people who have a bench grinder or 2 and probably didn't think of that needed a procedure. Does it need it? We all agree yes. Did we all agree before we came today that it would need it? Yeah? This is really commonly overlooked. And you can guess when an OSHA inspector's on site, do you think he goes right to your production floor and asks you where your procedure for your filler is? Or your injection molding press, or your high-speed packaging line? He knows you have, or she knows you have procedures for that. They're going to go to this outlining equipment, these things, a real simple one that bite you. Why does it need a procedure? We all said it needed one. Cord and
Source
plug,
of power.
immediately obvious. What's the second source?
Stored energy, it spins.
Yep, kinetic energy. This is running at 99.9% full power right after you unplug it for several seconds. If you try to stop that disc, it doesn't need the electrical connection to give you the same amount of force on your fingertip or hand as it did while it was plugged in. We did the force calculation on a small bench grinder like this. It's the equivalent of 5 industrial refrigerators on your hand, weight-wise. We like to equate it to not just poundage, but something that you can identify. 5 refrigerators. If somebody saw some gap there, they're not going to stick their hand in there real quick, but they see a bench grinder here, they're trying to replace the wheel on it, and they're like, oh, unplugged it, gotta wait. Hey, I'll stick my hand on there, I got a glove on. And then what?
Worse.
Hold your whole hand in, amputate your finger with abrasion. Yep. This is the kind of equipment it happens on, because this is the equipment people don't respect. And it's the equipment that still requires a procedure. Simple exhaust fan on the roof, does that need a procedure? Yep. Yeah, I hear, oh no, I got a bigger list than I thought. You're not alone. This is a list of commonly overlooked equipment. Why does it need a procedure if it does? We're assuming it does, right? Why does it need a procedure?
And it's gonna spin for a long time after it's off.
You're right, it will have kinetic energy residual. Okay, let me say...
It may actually
it's a new-
spin just based on convection currents through out of the
Yes.
building.
Yep.
So that's
Air
going to be,
differential?
that's another issue that comes into play.
That needs to be
that we've
re-engineered
seen
or
on
use a
those.
tool to slow it down. Let's take kinetic energy out of the equation on this one. Let's say it wasn't a problem. Say the new style fan Dyson made that doesn't have any blades, and it's not kinetic. There's no problems.
Where's the isolating valve?
Exactly. Remember that first one or second one? Have one energy disconnect, so it's not the one that's important here. Easily isolated. How is that easily isolated when you can't find it?
There's normally a switch right inside the cover.
This one doesn't have one.
Oh, then you're in trouble.
And you're a contractor with 15-minute work order to get the belt replaced, and it's not running, and there's no way to know how to lock it out. What do you think is likely going to happen? Just pull it apart, change the belt, hope it doesn't start back up?
See, those are the
That's
ones
what-
I would still fight, because if I have a procedure and I have the isolating device clearly defined as to where it's at and what you gotta do, if you've gotta go downstairs to get to it, you gotta go downstairs.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is the ones that cause a lot of the accidents like that one we're on. That's why we're bringing it up. It's not that it doesn't need it or that you're absolutely correct. Definitely enforce that and require that they go down. I'm just saying what's likely to happen is when you have a contractor there who's under time commitments and the procedure's not right at the point of use, glaring them in the face, telling them it's got kinetic energy, it's got electrical, 240 volt or 480 volt, and it's located in MCC room on 3rd floor, breaker number 6, labeled exhaust fan PEF 40. Now he's like, oh, I know where that's at. It takes me like 5 minutes. I'll go do that. Versus, I don't even know who to call to get this procedure. I don't know where these isolation points are. This could be an all-day thing. And then, you're stuck in training, and who knows what else. In their mind, they're thinking, it's off right now. I got this little belt. I'm just going to put it on real quick before it starts back up. And then computer control in the building calls for air, and it turns the fan on. Yeah.
Even though he said that this tank was inside that cover, I had the exact same thing happen to me. I actually turned it off, did what I was supposed to do, put the belt down, started it back up, belt busted, dragged my arm right in. And I was doing everything the way I was supposed to do it, but it happens.
What happened now? The switch
I
not
switched
functioning?
up, the switch is inside that cover.
Okay.
You can lock it out.
Yeah.
I put the new belt on, started it up, and belt busted right there.
That wouldn't be a lockout issue as much as it would be just a machine malfunctioning.
Well, it wasn't machine
Yeah.
malfunctioning, but they thought it was a
Lockout issue, yeah.
Yeah.
But you had the switch locked out and that isolated it. That should have been fine. Yeah,
Well,
there's just
inside
equipment that
there.
malfunctions. OSHA wouldn't call that they might have called it a failure of machine guarding if you had the guard on and the
That's
belt
what I'm thinking.
snagged out of you and got your arm anyway, or if you didn't have the machine guard on.
Well, that is the guard.
That is the guard.
That is
The
the
cover
guard.
is the guard.
You're
So you
down
had the
inside
cover
there.
off?
Oh, yeah, you're down inside.
Okay, then that's a lockout issue because you were still in service when it was operational.
Yes.
So that's why they're argued lockout. Lockout and machine guarding so often get cited at the same time, as you can imagine why. So you get cited for 1910.212 machine guarding, and you'll get cited for 1910.147 if there's an accident. Because you could have prevented it with a guard, and it shouldn't have been a problem because you could have locked it out. So they'll get you for both.
And that would be lockout because the guard is no longer protecting that belt.
Right.
Right, you pop the guard.
Mm-hmm.
So, or it could be machine guarding.
Yeah, because he removed the guard and didn't put it back on.
Guard.
Yeah.
Right.
How would you put a placard on that stating which breaker and box?
We got a picture in the back of an exhaust fan with a placard hanging right on it. We actually have outdoor mountable procedures with 10-year UV resistance that we
Okay.
developed that you just print them onto this format and you place them right at point of use in any environment.
That's my question.
Yeah.
It's such a hard environment.
It is.
But anything you put out is going to fade.
Fade or blow away and land in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Trust me, we learned from experience. Our logoed procedures with our phone numbers landing on customers' cars and they're calling us up and like, what? Oh, in Greenville? Oh, is the procedure again? Okay. Damn it, doesn't work outside. Got it. So we tried everything. We tried double zip tying them, stainless steel zip ties, Velcroing them with the zip ties, the high winds, the UV, the rain, the heat. You have to have a format that's designed for that. And so we patented an injection molded format with a stainless steel insert with UV rated inks, and it's all polypropylene. It's basically bulletproof and is made for outdoor use. And we went through a lot of trials before we arrived at that conclusion for the same pains that you have.
Yeah.
What about this piece of equipment? Does that need a procedure? Hope and no. Somebody be bold. It does not need a procedure.
If I
Typically.
put a 25-foot cord on there and I have it around the corner, is that under my exclusive control?
And it's not easily isolated anymore. It could be wrapped around other cords, and then it's not obvious how to isolate it. You've added a doubt to how to lock it out, and so now you need a procedure. Also, there's another criteria. So even though this is simple and it might stay with a 12-inch cord like that its whole life, what was that 8th criteria?
No prior accident.
So it might not have needed a procedure its whole life. And then what happens when somebody has thought, hey, you know what, rather than replace this $25 drill, I'm just going to spend 4 hours of my time and replace the brushes and take it apart, put it back together, and then leave it apart without being locked out. Somebody else comes up, plugs it in to use it, and the thing self-destructs and hurts them. That's an accident due to uncontrolled energy. On that piece of simple equipment, that's the kind of thing that happens. And now it's in your OSHA 300 log. So when OSHA's there, they're going to look at your OSHA 300 log and they're going to say, all right, I see there was an accident with a hand drill. Show me your procedure for that now. And you're like, oh, it doesn't need one. It's a cord and plug. It's real simple. There's no kinetic there. Like, no. It's in your OSHA 300 log. Where's your procedure?
Now, is it just for that drill or anything if you get rid of
No.
that drill?
It's for all models like that now. All hand drills in your... But you can create one for all styles. You don't have to hang a 9x11 sheet of laminate on all those drills. This is one that's perfect for the binder in the safety manager's office because it's done for compliancy, but it's pretty dang obvious how to lock that out. It's not going to be advantageous to mount that one at point of use.
I guess my question would be, why have I got a 25-foot cord on a hand drill to begin with, instead of the OEM length?
You'd be amazed what some people do and how they patch them in the middle.
It's not OEM is what
It
he's
isn't
saying.
going to be
It's
OEM.
been modified.
Well, and then
There's electrical violation there.
probably, yeah, another write-up coming.
Yeah. I've seen some interesting mods in our time.
How many people here use standard outlet surge strip in their office and then daisy chain them?
Don't look in our offices.
They're only approved when they're plugged into a wall outlet.
Right.
After that, they're no longer approved.
Mhm.
Think of that.
So this one does not need a procedure and review, so don't be paranoid about it. It doesn't need a procedure, but just know it's limited to accidents. That's the wild card there. If you do have an accident, now you're required to have a procedure. The reasoning is they want to prevent that accident from happening again. So it might have met all 8 criteria, but if there was ever an accident, you need to have a procedure to hopefully prevent that from happening again.
So if, say you break your hand because the drill jammed up
Oh,
and you're
torque.
actually using
Yeah.
it for a drill.
Doesn't count.
Something even simpler than
It
that.
has to be
Changing the
due.
bit with it plugged in.
It's not just accident.
No.
It's accident due to uncontrolled energy.
Okay.
So not usage. If you're drilling, you drill into your leg. Pretty common. People do that.
Yeah, sure about that.
That's not lockout
I
tagout.
haven't tried that.
Yeah.
yet.
Or people's using a steel saw right across their leg.
Or
That's-
air nailers are notorious for accidents.
Yeah, right in the
One
legs.
in 4 carpenters has nailed their fingers together
Oh, I
somewhere.
wish you just said that.
All right, so moving on. Somebody asked about vehicles early on. Do they need procedures? I'm pointing out a garbage truck, not just a regular Honda Civic.
Oh, yeah.
It needs a procedure?
Yep.
Vehicles? Portable equipment? Yep. It does, and why?
So the hydraulic,
More than one energy source,
Air,
right? So it
air,
doesn't meet one of the 8
hydraulic.
criteria. We could just stop asking questions there. But for fun, let's find all the energy sources.
gravity,
Gravity,
hydraulic, pneumatic,
Electrical,
electrical.
kinetic.
Fuel.
thermal from the motor. 7. What about potential from movement of the entire thing? Chalking the wheels. That's 8.
There's some really good videos on vehicular roll downs these days.
Oh yeah, when I was looking for lockout, I got more of those. Heavy equipment running over people. So there's 8 sources right there, and there's probably a few more, but there's one more important element to this piece of machinery. What happens if I get in there?
Compactor.
Definitely. So what does that mean? Is it meant for permanent occupancy?
No.
So what does that mean?
Confined space.
Confined space.
Not just confined space, what kind?
PRCS.
permit required confined space. Permit required confined space requires a lockout procedure. So now you have two procedures that need to talk to each other, of which this probably doesn't even have a procedure to begin with. I can almost guarantee you, with my experience, most people, most companies for the vehicles don't have. That's a very commonly overlooked item. Forklifts are starting to become a trend. People are recognizing those that need procedures, but they leave off their fleet vehicles. They leave off their specialized vehicles like this. What if, now, breaking vehicles down a little bit with hybrid technology and batteries and becoming more complicated and electric fans that can turn on after the car's been off for a while. What about, now OSHA is just for workplace, so it doesn't count for your house. So you don't need one in your glove box when a cop pulls you over. But what if you're a service tech at the Toyota dealer on 27th Street and you're serviced in a Toyota Prius? Do you need a lockout procedure for that car?
You should.
Yes. And do you think they have one?
No.
Probably not. I'm guessing. They probably have a manual that references something about lockout, but a lockout procedure to be compliant must be a separate document. You can't just say, oh, it's information in a manual somewhere. It has to be a separate document designated for lockout, have all the information that's required, magnitudes, how to isolate, what device to use, how to test. It all has to be spelled out. And unless they have a lockout manual at Toyota for all the makes and models as they come out, and new cars are coming out more complex, more computerized, they're out of compliance.
I've seen some electrical safe work practice procedures for the hybrids already.
They're
coming into play.
something that a manufacturer should be burdened to make, I think, because the car's not going to change a whole lot. It's not going to be modified like equipment is when it's installed. And I think manufacturers should be the ones making those.
And NFPA is actually devising criteria for the charging stations and all those.
Yeah.
Actually, as we speak, they're working on those right now.
I doubt manufacturers will make them, though, for the same reasons I'm seeing a trend of manufacturers actually removing guards from machinery when they ship it out. Why? Liability. The lawyers. You ship it out with a lockout procedure and somebody gets hurt, and you're Toyota, one of the biggest automotive manufacturers out there, you're now liable for that nice procedure that you gave with the hopes that you're keeping people safe. So they might just say, make your procedure. Like they're saying with machine guarding, make your machine guarding to your specs. And don't operate without machine guarding. There's a little sticker on there that says that now. So examples, as we went over, all the obvious. Your milling machines in production, conveyors, injection molding machines, reactors. Everybody knows conveyors need them, right? Even if it's single source. Why?
Have there been any previous news?
We'll assume there's not. You have a conveyor that's in line with another conveyor, it's in line with another conveyor, typical setup. You're servicing that middle conveyor. It's a single energy source. There's no transfer chains between. What's the problem? What about when you shut that one down and this conveyor feeds that product right on top of you? Or you're working on the nip point between and the other conveyor activates and amputates your hand? That's why. It's adjacent equipment. That's considered a secondary energy source.
Or if you have material on the conveyor and it starts to go backwards, a motor in reverse is a generator.
Then it's a potential energy too. So you have potential for electrical buildup, and you have potential for gravity for the belt movement from the weight that's on the belt. So there's a lot of angles to look at, and conveyors are really common for causing amputations and death. Don't overlook them because they're simple. Have a procedure for them.
How many people here have conveyors in their facilities? Yeah, that's.
Do you have procedures for all your conveyors with confidence? Show of hands again. Low-hanging fruit. I mean, these are the ones you want to attack first. Injection molding machines, those are obvious. Example here, reactors, facility equipment. This is the one that's commonly overlooked. Air handler units on the roof, the exhaust fans, the air conditioning units, heaters, pumps, centrifugal pumps, diaphragm pumps, anything that takes product and moves it through has an inlet, an outlet, and a power source. Either it's pneumatic or electric. Those three sources. So basically, any equipment with more than one source of energy is your most common card to use. So here's a quick case study. I'm going to dive through this fast. Bottom line is, this is a true story. They thought they had 23 procedures, and we found out they had 23 molding presses. We knew this was not the amount of procedures they needed. We went there to do the scope that they needed. They got 23 procedures, and then we gave them a really nice report that shows them how many other procedures they need, since we're there to do compliancy. This is the end result here. This is how much equipment they actually had. that needed procedures. And they're like, oh great, this is what it looks like. After we were done, they were 20% compliant, and this is how much they had left to do. We'll stick to our scope so they don't get mad. But we're going to show them what else they have to do so that they don't get mad later when OSHA comes in and says, where's your air conditioning? Where's your conveyor? Where's your case packer? Where's your stretch wrapper procedures? So 80% liability, that's pretty common. Most people just go right down the production line and develop procedures for their production equipment and leave off all the ancillary equipment. And that's what can happen. It's not just 10% extra, it's usually the majority of your equipment is ancillary. The support equipment for that. Dock doors, dock locks, unit heaters in your warehouse area, the fork trucks. So what does that mean for calculations? You'd ask about that. This is what that would look like if OSHA came by after we were there. And we don't call OSHA our clients, so we let them figure it out on their own. 92 procedures. So they were, 92 were non-compliant, so 80% liability. This is what that would equate to if OSHA threw the book at them. 92 procedures, if they know about it now, $70,000 each, $6.4 million. Plus, because they knew about it and did nothing about it, if there was a fine or an accident, a fatality, they could go to jail for that. It could be a felony, and the people who were in charge of making sure that program didn't get implemented could go to jail. If they'd never been cited before, so let's say we weren't on site and they only developed that 20 themselves, and they did not know of the non-compliance, they just were ignorant to the issue, and they thought, well, I thought it was just production equipment. OSHA says, okay, I get it. You didn't know. They might be nice to them. 92 times $7,000, $644,000. Best case.
Well, that's not a good selling point.
I think it's cheaper to just do it usually. Proactive is a tenth the cost of reactive, both accidents and citations. So why you need is to comply, reduce the risk of injury, liability. Every piece of equipment should have a lockout procedure. And why you want it, there's reduced insurance rates. Anybody heard of voluntary protection program? Yep. Sharp is another agent. There's a few others. Reduced insurance costs. There's morale boosting effects of investing in safety. And lockout, because it's the number one and it's low-hanging fruit, is a really good one to invest in. So industry where it applies, basically everywhere there's a U.S. worker is the easiest way to say it. And where lockout-tagout specifically, the federal regulation doesn't apply, but equivalent regulations that deal with energy control do. Agriculture, maritime, oil, pipelines, and construction, they're not exempt though. They still have to have their own programs for energy control that's identical to lockout. They just copied and pasted in their own regulation. And if they can't prove equivalent level of oversight, OSHA can and will step in. Which employees need to be lockout authorized? Again, anybody who's putting a lock on their machine